Every time I start a new campaign, if there's an opportunity to run a gauntlet, I pitch the idea to the players and I hope. I adore starting a new campaign with a gauntlet. A gauntlet is like a prequel adventure where the players use zero-level characters without classes or abilities. It's just their wits versus the dungeon, no fancy powers. And today we're going to dive into why Shadowdark's Gauntlet is a phenomenal way to kick off your campaign, what it is about gauntlets that are fun, what are some of the important levers and dials and switches for a referee to know, how to approach it as a player. We'll dive into a little history. It'll be everything about gauntlets today. Hi, I'm John. This is a place I like to talk about Shadowdark, old school D&D. Today's all about gauntlets, but before we dive in, I want to tell a story about a classic play experience back in the 1980s that primed me to love this style of play. If you're an old timer, maybe you remember this one. Let's take a look. I'm talking about Against the Slave Lords. It was a series of tournament modules for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, like 1981 or thereabouts. And in the fourth one, in the Dungeons of the Slave Lord, well, technically at the end of A3, Assault on the Area of the Slave Lords, the players are captured, stripped of their gear, and at the beginning of A4, in the Dungeons of the Slave Lords, they are dropped in a cave system, with nothing, loincloths and underwear, basically, and they have to escape before this volcanic island goes kablooey. And of these modules, most players love that experience because it challenges them in a totally different way. The magic users have lost their spells. The players are cut off. The clerics, rather, are cut off from their deities. They might have access just some level 1 spells. And the players don't have any of their magic items or special gear or powers. You just have to pick stuff up in the dungeon and try to get out. You will get all your gear if you can make it to the slave lord ship before the island blows up and before the slave lords escape. It's just there's a real time crunch and a lot of pressure. And the artwork in this adventure module really underlined the theme of the player characters not really having anything to rely on in terms of their powers and abilities. They're just picking up whatever they can find in the dungeon, like clubs and bones and things like this, trying to get past these different challenges. It was really a unique experience, and lots of old schoolers will remember it and think fondly of A4. However, this wasn't Wizards of the Coast or TSR back then. This wasn't TSR's only foray into gauntlet-style stuff. Back in 1986 and 1987, TSR actually published the first 2 zero-level adventures. It started with N4 Treasure Hunt, and then there was N5 under Illifarn. And in both these cases, you started with zero-level characters who did things during the adventure, and then that pushed you towards becoming a certain type of level 1 character eventually when you finished it. So this idea of a zero-level prequel actually goes back to the TSR era. One of the Greyhawk books, Greyhawk Adventures, actually had a whole appendix on making zero-level Greyhawk characters as well. All right, so enough history. Let's dive into what makes Gauntlet, starting a Gauntlet. Gauntlet 101, let's call it. From a referee's perspective, you need to have a short, deadly dungeon with opportunities for combat, monsters, traps, some really cool stuff that the players can find. The players show up with 4 zero-level characters. Now, Dungeon Crawl Classics, DCC has really turned this into kind of fine art nowadays with their funnel system. And Shadowdark and DCC both have this concept of bringing 4 characters into the zero-level adventure. In the DCC funnel, you play all 4 at once. Shadowdark kind of harkens back to that TSR era zero level where you're just playing 1 character at a time. You've got all of these backups. I love the piece of art here. It's from a Dungeon Crawl Classics adventure we'll talk about a little further later. But it really shows the spirit that you're just You're entering the funnel or the gauntlet. You got a peasant with a pitchfork. Someone back there has like a wood chopping axe. Someone else has a torch. You're just kind of hoping for the best. And then the idea behind the gauntlet is that whichever of your characters survives at the end becomes level 1. So why do I love these things? Well, as you could get from my discussion about A4, I love the fact that this challenges the player characters and their problem solving more than them relying on their character sheet and the powers and abilities that their characters have, because they don't have any. It's deadly, but funny. Gauntlets will lean into some dark humor, no doubt. There's low investment. You can just randomly generate 4 characters. So if someone dies, the stakes are very low. You just introduce the next character into the gauntlet. It's a true 0 to hero arc. Your character literally is starting as a normal person who hears the call to adventure in a Joseph Campbell Hero of 1,000 Faces or The Power of Myth style, and sets out on some kind of perilous journey. And then at the end of it, they're actually going to restart their life now as a level 1 character. And then there's this opportunity to develop real backstory and personalities through play, as opposed to I'm going to go off and write a 5-page backstory about my character. I'll give you an example, and this is tied into the gauntlet we're currently doing. You could end up with a character like, so let me tell you the story of how I became called Logan Nine Fingers. There I was in a sea cave facing a troll that wanted to eat us, but would let us go if we gave it some fingers. Sometimes you just have to be realistic about these things. So that situation literally happened in one of our gauntlets, although hopefully some fans of Joe Abercrombie and the first Law trilogy can appreciate the reference to Logan Nine Fingers, an awesome fantasy character. And we'll talk about that troll situation a little bit later in today's video too. What does a referee need to worry about to run a good gauntlet? I think one of the switches to consider, are you going to do it TSR style, where you've got one character at a time? That's certainly what Shadowdark recommends, as opposed to the DCC style where everybody goes in with all 4 characters at once. If you're only going to do one character at a time, you need to think through the mechanics of the dungeon, like the fiction and how replacement characters are going to be introduced. Shadowdark does have a random table you can use to introduce other 0-level characters to the dungeon. And so every gauntlet's different. For the sea cave one we're doing right now, I had the players enter the sea cave with boats. So they each have 2 of their characters, one that's actively exploring and one that's staying with the boats. I said, listen, if you are unlucky and you have to get to your 3rd or 4th character, then we're going to roll on the table. But at least the first 2 of the player characters, at least 2 of the players' characters are with them. You roll gear randomly. So one thing you want to make sure is, do you care if everyone even has a weapon? I always make sure that the players have at least one weapon with them that's a 1d4 weapon, either a knife, a club. I'll say like an improvised farm implement, like a pitchfork, does 1d4. The players will pick up loot and gear along the way. And so you want to make sure the gauntlet has just mundane items that become treasures. The players probably don't have enough torches for a big gauntlet because it's random. So you want to make sure that they can actually pick up other torches in the gauntlet, for instance. And you do need to think about length. Do you want this to just be a 2 or 3 hour extended character creation night, and you're going to make these first level characters at the end? Or if the gauntlet's more extensive, maybe it lasts for a couple different sessions. Horde of the Seawolf King, the one I'm running right now, we've been at it for a couple sessions. It's kind of an extended exploration, which brings me to probably like one of the more important things you need to think about as a referee, which is the aesthetics of leveling up. Some gauntlets may not have a big gap between the gauntlet and when you want to start the adventure. Aesthetically, I don't like that. I much prefer a gauntlet where the players, they have this call to adventure, they go and do a gauntlet as 0 level characters, and then there's a time gap before the campaign starts where the players can explain, hey, I went off and learned to be a mercenary, or I finished my wizard college, or the events of the Sea Wolf Cave inspired me to go to the temple and become an Odin priest, or something like that. You do want the gauntlet to tie into your campaign themes so that the gauntlet matters to the kickoff of the campaign. I'm going to give you guys a bunch of examples later in this video. And if you're playing in person, you'll have these sheets that have all 4 characters on them. I've actually seen people invest in dead stamps just for fun, where you're like dead, dead, dead. And then you get to see exactly who survived the gauntlet. This is from the referee's perspective. So what do the players need to have in terms of mindset? First off, before you even talk about mindset, there's a website, shadowdarklings.net, that makes it's trivial to just push some buttons. It will generate 4 random characters for you. They look like this, so they all show up compact on a single sheet of paper. You can just print it out and you're ready to go. When we use shadowdarklings.net, I usually let the players change things like the name, the deity, the alignment, even the ancestry if they want. Like this crazy one ended up with 3 goblins and a kobold. Go figure. You might not even want those in the campaign. So there are like some switches and things you can you can turn on and off in the website. But I was talking about attitude and mindset. So what do I mean? I do think you need to have a little bit of detachment because the characters are not, chances are several of them are going to die along the way. So don't get too attached to anyone. Be bold, be creative, and be bold. To dare is to do. One of my players has coined the phrase goblin mode. There's points in the gauntlet, he says, where we're facing something that's way beyond us. And the only way we're going to do it is if everybody all jumps in at the same time. Maybe it's trying to ambush a big monster or something. And go into it knowing that like half the party is going to die and we're going to have to bring up replacement characters. But if we go into goblin mode, we can get past this challenge. And that's a real mindset shift for players used to like clinging to their characters. You are going to scavenge gear. Your guy enters the dungeon with a club and then he dies and your next character has a short bow, but he loots the other character. So now you're like, I've got a short bow and a club. And before you know it, by the end of the gauntlet, you probably might have some armor that you scavenged, a shield, and you might actually start looking like a real adventurer by the end. And I have noticed my players think about the strategy for their characters because they've got these 4 characters. A lot of times they start with one of the worst characters, expecting them to die, and then they want the character that has the good stats that they want to play as their actual level 1. They're trying to keep them on the bench until it's the right time to introduce them, and they think that they've got a reasonable chance of surviving the gauntlet. And like I mentioned with the Logan Nine Fingers story, funny things are going to happen during the gauntlet, and backstory or some identity of your character is just going to emerge organically. It's one of the truly awesome things about starting with the gauntlet. All right, so what are some of the criticisms or issues people have? One, if you're anxious, it delays the start of the meaningful part of your campaign a little bit. The gauntlet's tacked on at the beginning, and think of it like an extended character generation. You do have to think about game speed. I usually have 6 players at my table. If I was going to let them run all 4 characters at once, that'd be like 24 player characters taking a turn before we flipped it back over. If you do the Shadowdark style of just 1 character at a time, you're not going to have any issues with game speed. Not everybody likes random characters. Then again, if you don't like random characters in 3d6 down the line, maybe you're not an OSR person in heart anyway. People will say, oh, there's no role playing, but listen, you don't need 5 pages of backstory for an interesting character to emerge through actual play. But I did mention the tone is different. You're not as attached to the characters. There tends to be a little bit more dark humor because some of these 0 level guys are going to truly die in horrible ways without a whole lot of investment. But then, it becomes more serious as the gauntlet gets deeper, and you start getting to those characters who you really want to survive. All right, what are some popular gauntlets if you want to take up this idea yourself and use something published? Hey, before I dive into that, if you're enjoying this video and my channel, please consider subscribing. I'm closing in on 5,000 subscribers, which is pretty cool. And I figure when I get to that point, I'll do something cool and different. Maybe start a Discord channel for folks, something to build more community. Anyway, thanks for being here. Let's look at those published gauntlets. So Dungeon Crawl Classics has been at this like almost 15 years. They've got some legendary funnels that you can convert to being Shadowdark gauntlets. Probably one of the most iconic is Sailors on the Starless Sea. I would start any campaign with that if I could. Hole in the Sky and Frozen in Time, I think, are probably out of print, but you can get them in PDFs. Shadowdark hasn't been around nearly as long. Oh, and going back to DCC, they just did a cool Kickstarter. It was like the Book of Funnels. It's going to have like 20 of these 0 level funnels in them, including some reprints. Shadowdark hasn't been around as long. Trial of the Slime Lord is excellent and really well regarded by Jordan Rudd. Kelsey herself did one in Curse Scroll 3, Horde of the Sea Wolf King, which I'm currently playing. There's even a free DCC one out there, Portal Under the Stairs, that you can get. For me, the important thing is to think about how a gauntlet will complement the campaign concept. And so to trigger your imagination, I'm going to give you some ideas on gauntlets that I've used to tie into campaign concepts. Light bulbs will go off here, I promise. All right, the first one, there's a gauntlet called Cry of the Stingbat, and I paired it up with Horror on the Hill. Okay, so Horror on the Hill. It's this classic TSR adventure. There's a frontier fort way out there sitting on a river, and across the river, there's this building threat. There's dungeons underneath this hill, and humanoids are forming an army there. So the frontier is under pressure. And Cry of the Stingbat is about settlers moving too close to some humanoid lands, and the humanoids are kidnapping people and dropping them into the stingbat nest. The idea being that if the stingbats have a lot of food, they breed like crazy, and flocks of stingbats are going to make the frontier uninhabitable to the settlers. So these themes are somewhat synergistic. I had the player characters were like merchants and traders and frontier farmers who were all kidnapped by the goblins from Horror on the Hill and dropped into the stingbat nest to feed the stingbats. In the gauntlet, you only have a certain amount of time to escape before dawn, and all the stingbats come back and eat everyone who's still in the nest. And so the players have to escape with a time limit. They did. They went to the fort. They warned the commander about the stingbat nest. And then this launched them to go off, become level 1 adventurers. And when they regrouped back at the fort, now with a personal vendetta against those humanoids across the river who had thrown them into the stingbat nest. So that was a great way to kick off a campaign. You can see how you can make your gauntlet like really synergistic with what you expect the first adventure to be. Another one I pitched to my players at one point, I love The Lost City. It's like one of my favorite adventure modules from back in the day. There was an ancient civilization that has now been buried by the desert sands, but everyone went underground, and you can still find them by entering their ancient ziggurat. That's the idea behind The Lost City. Your players are lost in the desert. And Plague Jewels of Sekhmet, which is this gauntlet by Circe Victory, you wake up deep in a tomb. You're actually like reincarnated servants of a goddess. And you have to escape the tomb. I thought, how cool would it be if you wake up in the tomb, you escape the tomb, and when you reemerge, your paradise world that you remember from thousands of years ago is gone, buried underneath the sands, and the only way you can discover what happened to the civilization is if you enter the Lost City. However, my players chose to do Curse of Strahd instead, which we'll talk about because I kicked that one off with the Gauntlet. But first, one of the most natural pairings is Trial of the Slime Lord with Curse Scroll 1. There's an adventure in it called The Hideous Halls of Mugdalblub. Mugdalblub is like this Cthulhu entity that's being worshipped by all these cultists. It's like a god of slime, the Elder Ooze. And Trial of the Slime Lord involves a slime cult that is sacrificing people to the Slime Lord. So the peasants in it have to escape this dungeon. If they do, they could come out with this magic hammer that's like a bane to all slime and ooze creatures. Again, launching you right into the themes of Curse Scroll 1 and the Gloaming, and giving your player characters a chance to have 0 level characters come out with a really cool piece of gear. And then if they're in the Gloaming, they would definitely be targets of the cults that are in the hideous halls of Mugdalblub. I would love to kick off a Gloaming campaign at some point using these two synergistically. Hey, I mentioned Curse of Strahd. I just finished a 2-year campaign running Curse of Strahd for Shadowdark. We kicked it off with Death House. Death House is an intro adventure in the back of Curse of Strahd. I turned it into a 0 level gauntlet. I treated it like a Narnia type place where Death House shows up in your favorite city, but people who enter Death House, when they leave, they're no longer home. They step out onto the streets of Barovia, and now they're trapped in the cursed valley of Barovia. So I did a whole retrospective video on that and older videos on how to use Death House. This worked out pretty well. Although it is one of those gauntlets, I didn't love the aesthetics of it because there was no opportunity for the peasants when they left Death House to spend like 6 months off somewhere training and finishing their schooling. They had to just jump right into level 1 and then begin the Curse of Strahd campaign. So you can't always, so there are trade-offs. You can't always follow your aesthetics. And then what I'm currently doing right now, I have had this home setting for like 15 years kicking around called the Black City. It's a frozen alien city in the north. It's being explored by Nords or Vikings. If you've played a convention game with me the past couple of years, chances are you did a small dungeon adventure in the Black City. So hi, folks who've been in one of my games. And my home players are now going to go there because I've been converting it to Shadowdark. We're kicking off this campaign with Horde of the Seawolf King. You are 0 level Nordic peasants, and your Jarl has said if you can go to the sea caves and come back with a fabulous treasure, you will have earned your place on one of my longships, and you too can join the Nords going north to explore the Black City. That's currently what we're doing. And again, very synergistic with the themes of the campaign. Okay, everyone, that's a wrap for today. Hope this opened your eyes on why gauntlets are amazing, a fantastic way to kick off your campaign. Clearly, I adore them. I mentioned several times we're doing Horde of the Seawolf King right now. If there's interest, I'll talk to my players if they want to do a retrospective. They have had some great emerging stories come out of it, and they're developing some really interesting characters. So I could do a video talking about how we staged it and then some interviews on how it went for their player characters and who now they're actually going to play in the campaign. All right, that's it. Thanks for being here. See you guys next time.